Hi, welcome back. My name's Chris from We Communicate. If you're discovering this channel, I teach French to speakers of English specifically, and I do that by being bilingual, so I make your journey into French easier. And today we're going to be talking about what are my kids learning in school. Initially, I wanted to do a completely different video. I wanted to do a review of Paul Noble's method that I found on YouTube. It was so annoying, it put me in a bad mood, so I'm not even going to talk about it. I'm going to go back to my usual format. What are my kids learning in school? That's what we're going to talk about. Okay, let's get started. Many a parent has enthusiastically asked their child what they had learnt today in school, have you not? Only to see the conversation shut off by a disinterested nothing. Oh, come on, surely you learned something today. You were gone for 8 hours, the parent will answer in feigned disbelief, vaguely hoping that school had improved since their own time. But what if the child was telling the truth? What if no learning whatsoever had happened? We could return the question to the parent and ask them what they realistically believe the child might have learned. Do you perhaps think your child learned 50 new words of Spanish and 50 more tomorrow? Do you think they learned how to mix up a chemical substance that dissolves glass? Do you think they can offer a comment on the strategic errors of the Napoleonic Wars? What type of knowledge do you think it could have been possible to pick up in the span of a day, week, or month? Reading and writing. Sure. Even though in my experience, even mid-aged teens find it challenging to write or read a fluid text in native level English without skipping words, transforming them, and missing much of the punctuation. So what did they learn today? Let's first define knowledge and learning. Knowledge is a somewhat ambiguous term, as is learning. There's firstly a difference between passive knowledge and active knowledge as it comes to facts and skills. A person might have memorized for a brief while the key dates of the Russian Revolution, only to forget them in the hours following the exam. It's not the same skill to tell someone point blank about a topic we actively know about versus agreeing with facts and saying, oh yeah, I knew that, yeah, I saw that in school. Realistically, how many kids could we interview straight off the school bus and ask them to dazzle the listeners with all they learned last year? Tell our listeners all about something you learned. Could be a question from a journalist. Chances are many kids will propose isolated facts such as, oh, I know Jupiter is the largest planet, without being able to tie it to another fact, such as the reason it's important to know this fact about Jupiter. More alarming, perhaps, is the high probability that they remember nothing of the contents of the academic program just 1 year prior. We can offer the rebuttal that kids' minds don't yet work in such a structured way, which in a sense is as good as saying that school is one big blur. The minds aren't ready yet. What we did last year has already faded away. Another obstacle against picking up true knowledge in school is understanding how this knowledge is embedded within the context. In other words, do school children understand the context in which they're learning? Do they know who made the school programs? Why they were made? How a teacher corrects tests? Why there is homework? Why classes last for the same number of minutes each? What is the role of a principal? How a person becomes a teacher? How discipline is thought out? Do they know anything at all about the structure around their learning and the higher purpose it aims to achieve? If the answer is no to all of them, going to school in these conditions isn't too different from moving from workstation to workstation in a factory without understanding what the factory produces or who founded it. Worse still, because of an absence of classes on the skill behind the academic learning, the worker wouldn't know how to improve their output. Try to do your best. Not very helpful. Now, this isn't to say that individual skills can't be picked up along the way, though if this were football, becoming an expert at kicking the ball without understanding the governing body around the game or the structure of the tournaments would seem alarmingly simplistic. They just told me to play well, the uninformed footballer would say. If a person doesn't understand why they're being asked to know something, is it not equivalent to not knowing much at all? Do we not see the irony in saying, I can write the best essays in class, but I don't quite know why I'm doing it? When transferred into real life, quote unquote, such a remark would be quite worrying to hear, at the very least. For most school children around the world, going to school is an act that doesn't deserve further explanations. It isn't taken apart, discussed around the dinner table, questioned or examined as a system. The rare time school is questioned, this is usually interpreted as an act of rebellion, and just as soon answered by the classic, "Would you prefer to stay at home and be stupid then? How would you learn to read and write?" Going to school mostly means going to school. Children understand that it's a contract they must honour until they reach the age of 18 and do quote-unquote whatever they want afterwards. They understand that they must go to this place every day and be looked after. Naturally, to keep them busy, there are classes organised around different themes. Bit of maths here, a touch of geography there. Some will even say that if the level of abstraction wasn't so high, it would be close to impossible to keep the kids in line. What if one of the classes was on discussing the best practices in UX design based on personal perception? Would it be possible to keep a class subdued for a full semester? Similarly, too many inquiries and questionings by school children would have the effect of slowing down the curriculum. If every 12-year-old in the country interrupted the Monday morning class by, "Sorry miss, I'd like to come back to page 14 on adverbials. I read this article this weekend that disagrees with this classification," we could easily see the disruptive element despite it coming from a genuine place of interest. It would seem that the perfect class, quote-unquote, is one that maintains a certain level of abstraction, or at least doesn't come too close to being practical and subject to personal opinions. School's always been accused of being too far removed from reality or practical life skills. The curriculum acts as a sort of 12-year-long concentration of the main points of knowledge shared by a people. We study Shakespeare because it was decided that he's relevant within a certain culture. We study pyramids and the inventions of Adam Smith for the same reasons. As well as the topics it contains, the curriculum defines itself just as much by the knowledge it chooses to leave out. A kid will usually leave school not knowing how the world functions financially, or how the human mind guides them on a conscious or subconscious level, despite them being crucial to our well-being. They might not even know how to define their own identity. Instead, the school child will enter the world with hazy recollections of lab experiments and diagrams of frog anatomies, perhaps even memories of glorious baseball home runs. The curious design behind it all. Parents and children usually have trust that the curriculum is taken care of by benevolent people who have learning down to a science, down to a T. To justify the level of abstraction of the school program, there are usually two main arguments: the development of the young brain and the requirements of college. The first is the idea following which the years of schooling act as a sort of development support for the maturing of the brain. A carefully thought out curriculum helps the brain to full maturity through expertly chosen subjects. It explains why children engage in far-fetched maths problems which adults themselves have no use for. As a biological fact, it places humans in a strange category. It opens the question how humans ever achieved anything prior to the invention of the school curriculum, but also as a species. Do humans have the biological specificity of having to sit through 12 years of mental abstraction day in, day out, lest they find themselves underdeveloped and unable to function among their peers? We're a funny species, aren't we? However, not far removed from us today are the examples of Charles Dickens, who quit school at 12, Henry Ford at 15. A similar testimony of the human minds can be seen in the books by former American slaves Frederick Douglass, who couldn't read. The list of all the great thinkers, strategists, politicians, social reformers, architects and engineers, as far back as the Egyptians and the Greek philosophers, also point towards school not exactly being the necessary place of thinking it fancies itself to be. If the accomplishments of the greats show us anything at all, it may be that the human act of thinking is not linked to any sort of organised academic programme. Imagining a country without a school system would be utterly ridiculous. Though school is far from perfect, it does at least guarantee some form of learning and plays a role in our social cohesion. Families with less means can see their children claim a high school diploma and open the door towards higher education. It further acts as a barrier against senseless capitalism, as was seen during the age of the Industrial Revolution, to name just one. No, sir, I will not go down your mine for a 16-hour shift, nor down your chimney. I have school tomorrow. In its simplest description, school is a wonderful thing. The state takes in charge of the education of the children while the parents work. Once the children graduate, they have the assurance of the same level of education as anyone else, rich or poor. A very democratic system indeed. But despite this, it's still an invention that reaches its highest level as a theoretical model only. As soon as it takes physical form, the problems come creeping in. For example, how to choose the program, for what purpose, how long, how many days a week, what should children learn, should there be one grading for everyone regardless of personal circumstances, how do we grade, should parents be allowed to choose schools, should teachers be paid much at all. Without particularly trying, we quickly find countless structural faults that prevent the project of the public school from finding its ideal form. In the meantime, we take what we can and make do with a better-than-nothing sort of deal. Funding is always lacking, teachers are scarce, and pupils are bored. What would you change if you had to make the ideal school?